This evening, we travel to Hollywood. Our guest tonight, a film director, a writer, a musician, and a teacher at the New York Film Academy. As always, we have another great show for you tonight here on Rob's Inner Circle. Don't go anywhere. Stay right where you are. We'll be right back. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to Rob's Inner Circle. Tonight, something new. We have not only we're streaming on Facebook, we're also streaming on YouTube, and we got something new. Like I said, we're also streaming on Twitch. No, that's not the song from the Flintstones. It's another platform that we have introduced to our show. So thank you to everyone for tuning in. And I wanted to give a huge shout out to my good friend and producer, Rob's Inner Circle, Miss Jenny DuHaime, who just keeps getting some wonderful guests all the time. And this show is getting better and better. Jen, I just wanted to tell you, I wanted to acknowledge that you are a super excellent producer. Thank you very much for being there. The show is as great as it is, all because of you. I also wanted to give a big a shout out to my good friends at Daily Struggles. We released our episode yesterday, as a matter of fact, and we're getting a great response from the audience. Thank you so much. I do want to mention we have two new cast members that were introduced on Daily Struggles, and the names of Miriam Lopez and Mr. Jeff Alminio. So they're going to be brought into the show, and you two were absolutely phenomenal in your first performance with us on Daily Struggles. Bravo. And not only to you, also to the rest of the cast and crew who just keep doing some fantastic work. I am so proud to be associated with such great and talented people. While we're on the subject of Daily Struggles, our episode 7, our season finale, will be released this Friday, December 4th in the morning. So you guys want to keep your eyes out for that. And it's going to be a lot of fun. We have some great and talented people. Guys, something spectacular happened here in the Montreal region. One of our good friends, film producer, writer, and also actress, she got an award of excellence for her work. And I have the speech over here, the speech that they gave to her that I want to read out to you that she sent to me. So this is the award for the Let's Make a Film Festival, the award of excellence, going to Teresa Picciano. Congratulations, Teresa, from all of us here at Rob's Inner Circle. And all the gang at Daily Struggles were huge fans of yours, by the way. So this is how the speech went. A hardworking candidate who has demonstrated tremendous character over the years with projects in post, pre-prod, and in the works for future success written all over it. Teresa is present, beautiful energy, 100% effort, hardworking, and real. Proud to have had you on the board for several productions, a volunteer for 3 years in a row at our events, and strong promise to continue a great relationship. You are a valued member of the community. So once again, Teresa Picciano, congratulations. Bravo, a job well done. We're so proud of you. Good stuff. And we also want to finish things off over here. A last shout out to our good friend who's tuned in. I see you, Raul. Raul, we have something special for you. Raul is one of our fans. He's in California. Exactly where you are in California, I don't know. Maybe you can tell us, Raul. But one thing's for sure, we would like for you to private message your mailing address to us because we have something special for you. See, we had the cast over here, the productions that were shot. We have an autograph picture for you with Ange, and the other one with the 4 original members of Daily Struggles. So we would like to have your mailing address so we could send you these autograph pictures. So guys, it's time once again for our weekly ritual. Yay! Okay, guys. So I would presume everybody's in the pajamas, right? Of course. Everybody listens all the time, right? Pajamas. You have your glass of wine ready? it's time to relax. It's time to kick your feet back, relax, and welcome our guest into the show. So let's kick our feet back over here like that. Stretch out a little bit. Let the tension go. That's it. Nice and easy. I'm getting a little comfortable here. So, guys, that's it. So you just let the tension go and let us carry the load. Are you guys ready for a kick butt show? Because I know I am. Ladies and gentlemen, it's that time once again. It's showtime. And let's bring on our guest tonight. Our guest, all the way from Hollywood, California. And he's jumping up and down. Look at him. He's so excited. And we can't wait to have you on this show either, Paul. Hang in there a couple of more seconds. Ladies and gentlemen, our guest tonight is a film director, a writer, a musician, and a film teacher, like we said at the beginning, at the New York Film Academy. Here he is, Mr. Paul Francis Sanchez Yates.
Hey. Hi.
Oh, my God. Paul.
Hi, Robert. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for coming on. What an honor. What a pleasure, Paul. Thank you.
And thank you. And welcome to my writer's room, also known as my closet, during the times we have right now. I also have a 5-year-old who's in the other room. And if he makes a lot of noise, you might hear him, but it's better than me being in the office. So,
Paul, just say you got grounded.
Yeah, I got grounded. And I have to stay in my closet again for another couple of hours. It's typical. I have everything I need. I have tea and a pen and a piece of paper. So that's it.
What's the weather like in Hollywood right now at the moment we're speaking?
Right this minute, the sun set just now, right? So it just got dark, and it was warm today, 77 degrees. What is that for you? 20, 22? Okay. And so, yeah. But tonight it probably go down to about 10 or 50 hours. So it's going to drop a lot because winter's coming. But Los Angeles is crazy. We could have 100-degree day or two before Christmas. And also the weather's changing a bit, so we can have a couple extra 100-degree days. Normally it would be raining a couple of times this month, but it hasn't rained in a long time. Okay. I miss rain. That's the one thing about coming. If you didn't grow up in Los Angeles and you're from anywhere else in the world and you move here, it's beautiful every day. You can shoot every day. You can do a whole bunch of things. Cameras you can take outside without even trying to remember a raincoat or an umbrella, but you miss the rain, right? I miss the energy of rain, the cleansing energy of rain or snow, anything. Any change in the weather would be nice. You get a little cold nights and you'll notice people start wearing jackets, but other than that, it's sort of the same every day, which is great for filming. You can carry your scripts, you can carry your cameras, you can carry everything and never worry about, being caught out.
Well, Paul, okay, so to start off over here, you started off as a musician and filmmaker. You grew up as a punk rocker.
I did.
You started playing at the age of 12.
I did. I also started making films at the age of 8. So back then we didn't have, there was no home video. There was home Super 8, right? You had a little Super 8 camera, a little camera that would shoot 2.5 minutes, 3 minutes of film. As a matter of fact, I'm just going to reach over here in my magic closet. I have one. I was showing it to somebody the other day. I have an old Super 8 camera.
Oh my God.
Right. So it's right here.
Wow.
Can you see that? And it looks.
Is that a Yumi? A Bell and Howell?
This is a Chinon. So it's a lower model, but this is a sound Chinon Super 8 camera. And you'd put a little cartridge in here, right? And that little cartridge the nice thing about the cartridge is that you can't accidentally expose all the film. All you expose is a little tiny bit of it, but it goes right in there. And this one happens to take sound, so you have to have a sound cartridge. But I didn't have that while growing up. We just had silent ones. The cool thing is that I immediately, when handed the camera, I immediately tried to figure out how to do camera tricks. Do you remember the television show Bewitched? It was an old television show.
Something about the nose?
Yes. Yeah. You would wiggle it, and things would disappear and magically speed up.
That's right.
And I tried to figure out how they did the trick of having somebody disappear off screen. Okay. It's a fairly simple trick. You film two people. If you're going to make one person disappear, you film two people in the frame, right? And you say, cut, everyone hold still. This person walks out of frame, but then you resume filming and you shoot again and it looks exactly like the person has disappeared. So I realized I could make my mother disappear and reappear all over the house and all over the yard. It was so magical, right? It was so, I had, mastered a trick. And and I did it by just thinking about it, right? I figured out how it could be done. And so that got me really hooked on film early on. And then of course, Star Wars, right? I'm of the generation who saw Star Wars in the theater. And of course I saw it 3 times on opening day. And then I saw it probably 10 more times that summer, at least. And there was no home video yet either. So you would have to wait for it to be re-released or put on TV 3 years later. And I started imitating Star Wars scenes. And a lot of people my age did, but I would either do them with my friends or I would do them with little action figures. So you would make little action figures deal with the scenes and use firecrackers and little tiny explosions to imitate the big Hollywood explosions. So that's how I started off as a filmmaker. Like I realized that there was magic in filmmaking pretty quickly. And so I was hooked. I was hooked on the magic of filmmaking. So
you at one point were living in New York, weren't you?
Yes. Shall I tell you a little bit about the to get to New York, or do you want to just skip to New York?
Oh, well, go ahead. Tell us all about it.
No, so I'm sure you have, there's one near every city. There's a town that is fairly well-to-do. It is also fairly, we would call preppy. Do you know that expression? You know, preppies, right? The guys who wear Lacoste shirts and pink clothes sometimes, and they play, rugby and, lacrosse. And usually at least where I'm from, usually those kids are very white, right? That's just true. It's just that happens to be the town is very white. Now, I grew up Hispanic in my town, so that I was just a little darker, but to that world, I was very dark, right? The outsider is always the outsider, no matter what happens. But I grew up about 30 miles from New York City. So New York City was always a beacon. And I was very lucky because I had an uncle who was also a punk rock filmmaker. I wasn't yet a punk rocker. I was a young kid, a young impressionable kid. And he was a punk rock New York filmmaker in the 1970s. And he would come and whisk me away to New York, and we would go see rock bands, punk rock bands. But I would also help him make movies, because back then, some of the video stuff, if he was doing a video, he did a documentary about breakdancing. And back then, you would have a camera, and that camera was 35 pounds.
Oh, wow.
You would have to have it on your shoulder, and it didn't have tape in it. The tape recording device was separate, and that was 30 pounds. But it could only have a 6-foot cable. So I would have to follow behind him, holding this deck, running as, and anticipating, because if I break, if somebody falls, we're breaking $100,000 worth of equipment, right?
My God.
So, which wasn't his, which was the stations, whatever, it was the producers. And so I got very good at anticipating his moves and running behind him. And that's also got me more working with him and more, I was probably a little too young to be doing it, but I was good at it. And then that we were not poor. We were poor in that rich town. But then my mother had a little bit of a nervous breakdown, and she became an alcoholic, and we lost our house. And I lived on the streets, and I did not graduate from high school. I've never had a drug or a drink in my entire life. I've had caffeine. Caffeine is my friend. Caffeine is all of our friends, but I've never had a drug or a drink in my life. I've never even tried alcohol or any drugs. And so I was a homeless punk rocker. And New York was a little bit more welcoming because there were more of us. You know what I mean? And there was more artists, and there was more people that had funny haircuts, or that, liked the type of music and style that I was also attracted to. And it was also a scene about inclusion. Like, if you didn't judge us, you were included. If you judged us, you cannot be with us. But if you didn't judge us, it didn't matter if you liked one edge of punk rock or one part of disco, or had funny hair or didn't have funny hair, or were gay or straight or black or white. It didn't matter to us. As long as you didn't judge us, and then after that, as long as you respected us, right? It's don't judge and have respect for the other person who's making their own way. And yes, it was a little bit hippie, but the hippies had kind of died out and sold out. So the punks were the new edge, and the music was also very intriguing. And the music also influenced, like any new wave, like any avant-garde, it's always pushing an edge, right? You're pushing an edge, and that edge is to grow the art form. And so both my musical tastes and my film tastes had become sort of instantly cutting edge. As a matter of fact, there's even a a Canadian filmmaker that I saw early on at some screening. It must have been at the Museum of Modern Art, and his name was Arthur Lipset, and he made experimental films, and he made extremely beautiful experimental films because they're beautiful in that they feel like they have a soul, and a lot of them are found footage meets footage he shot. So there's a bit of footage he shot and a bit of footage that he found, and he would make these soundtracks that were just exquisite. Of course, he worked for one of the Canadian film and television archive thing at the time, right? So he had this access, and he made a film called 2187, which is the first film I ever saw by him. And it is just this movie that just everybody, it's only, 7 or 10 minutes long. And anyone who ever sees it is moved by it. And so later on, I was reading about George Lucas later on, and I'd already liked George Lucas because of Star Wars. And he said that 2187, this little tiny Canadian experimental film from the 60s, made him make Star Wars.
It influenced him to that point.
It influenced him to the point of making an entire film that's, if I describe one beginning to end and I describe the other beginning to end, they're not the same film at all, right? One's about Luke Skywalker saving the princess and blah, blah, blah. But there's this soul in the middle of it. And I think George Lucas saw a feeling of what he described as the Force came out of Arthur Lipset's little tiny beautiful movie. It's funny how filmmakers are influenced by the same things and how they're influenced by each other, right? It's this really strange small circle of a world of thought, I think. Anyway, so when I was homeless, I lived in New York City a lot because New York was accepting. I would also sleep on my best friend growing up, and my very good friend now, is a man named Moby. And Moby is a famous electronic musician and a DJ, et cetera, et cetera. But we went to high school together. And so he was always very focused on music. And so he actually did some of the soundtracks for my first films. And we would make early films together. And I would make his early music videos. But he also had an apartment in New York City a little bit later on. So there was always a space on the floor for me to sleep. I could always at least get over, if he was around, if he was there, I could get onto his floor. This is a little bit later in my life, but at least there was somewhere to sleep, and a friend, a comrade. So I lived in New York in a very interesting time because it was still the time where you could get mugged for walking down. Yeah. Cheers to you.
Cheers to you, my friend.
Thank you.
All the best to you.
Thank you. And I tell you this is not to tell you a sob story. This is to tell you a story of a life. Simple as that. I'm fine. And I'm more fine than that, which we'll talk about as we come along. Because, well, the New York scene then, which was the early 80s, and then the mid 80s, and then the late 80s, and then the early 90s, was a very interesting time. It went from punk to post-punk to techno, to electronic music. So there was always this avant-garde music scene happening, at least from the, obviously all the way back, 70 years before that. But I'm not sure the music scene is as crisp and clean in New York City. Sometime in the mid 90s, I think that sort of died away. Partly because New York City became impossible to live if you were poor, right? It got cleaned up, and and yes, you weren't mugged, but you also couldn't find an apartment for under $1,500 a month. So that just became impossible to live in, even in a single room flat, right? So for most people, a lot of people moved to Brooklyn, but a lot of people moved away. It was even cheaper to live in Los Angeles than it was to live in New York.
Wow.
And if you're talking about scenes, you can create your own scene, and I think Brooklyn did. And there are scenes all over the place. And I love scenes that don't have to do with a major city. I love a scene that's in the middle of nowhere because those kids have some guts, right? They have guts, and they have to find each other, and they have to hold on to each other tightly. And those scenes are really wonderful. But at the same time, you might want access. If you're my age now, you can have access like you can have a show in whatever spaceship you're in right now.
That's right.
But then you had to have access to good recording equipment. If you're making music, you could make it on your own as a punk rocker, but you couldn't get paid for it. Right. So you could play and be loved, but you couldn't get paid for it unless the music was higher quality. A record company wouldn't release you. And you might not want that, but you also might want to eat. You also couldn't have access to filmmaking because, even the cheapest filmmaking stuff was not video. It was still film, and that would cost you in the thousands of dollars to make something a couple of minutes long.
Wow.
So, and who has access to that except rich people or adjacent to rich people, right? Get to someone who has it and see if you can borrow it. Of course, there have been film communities that have allowed you to do that, and that has always been wonderful, but that's usually been in the experimental world, right? An experimental film is still limited to what you're doing. Although there's a good translation from experimental into music video, right? So you could theoretically make an experimental film, get a pop band or a big band to put your images to music, and that might get you some notoriety.
Paul, I just wanted to brief the audience a little bit over here. For those of you who have just tuned in, thank you very much for tuning in. Our guest tonight is a Hollywood film director, Mr. Paul Sanchez IV. If you have any questions, guys, because you guys usually are more vocal than this, you're a little bit timid tonight. Paul is going to be happy to answer your questions, anything to do with film directing, whatever it is, music, punk rock. Paul is going to answer your questions. So don't be shy. Okay.
Yeah, don't be shy. I'm nice.
So, Paul, you were talking to me because you've been in New York and now you're in California, Los Angeles, and Hollywood. Mm-hmm. You told me that there is a difference between the Eastern way of thinking of filmmaking and the Western side.
At least there has been for most of my life. New York filmmakers, and again, I am generalizing, so allow me, don't let me offend you if you're on either coast. Okay. The New York filmmaker person often considers themselves, a do-it-yourself filmmaker, an all-encompassing filmmaker. You're not a writer, you're not a director, you're not a producer. You're a writer, director, producer, and you're going to make pizza for everybody, and if you have to, you're going to clean the house afterwards, because for the most part, you're not getting as much access. So it's a more esprit de corps, right? So you're doing everything, but also your friends are helping you do everything. You might work for, and this is still the case a little bit, but when it was just film to get access to filmmaking, you might work for a month at a lowly job, get enough money to get a 10-minute roll of film, which might only turn into 1 or 2 minutes of actual film.
Exactly.
And then do it all again in a month, and then get your friends together again and have your spaghetti party. You all shoot your scene and then do it again in a month. So it might take you a couple of years to actually get a film together. So I know a lot of filmmakers in New York City call themselves filmmakers. In Hollywood, they like the caste system or the ladder system or the pigeonhole system. And they they don't always like multi-hyphenated people. They exist, but they don't love it because they feel in Hollywood that if you're a multi-hyphenate, that you don't do as well on all of them, right? If you're a producer, writer, director, blah, 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 all those things, then you're not great at one. You're a master of none, jack of all trades. But I grew up shooting, and so I think of myself as a cinematographer. Do I think of myself as the best cinematographer? Not at all. There are cinematographers who have studied their craft their whole lives, who know how to put a camera in a better place than I do, who know how to put a camera with better lighting than I do, right? So there's things I know I don't have. But I also know that I can shoot my own story almost as good as anybody. But I'd also know that I am smart enough also to give credit where credit is due. It's worth it to hire a good camera person now. It's worth it to hire a good editor. But I am often my own writer-director.
Okay, Paul, I just wanted to mention that we, before I went into the show, I'm sorry, I forgot to mention Jenny, that Jenny had vowed to walk 60 kilometers for the month because it's our Movember series that's coming to a close tonight, and you have the honor, Paul, of closing the series.
Wonderful.
So we will be mentioning how many kilometers or miles Jen has walked throughout the month of November. And one more thing, we have a common friend that has joined the podcast with us by the name of, you wouldn't happen to know someone called Jason A. White, would you?
Hello, Jason. I would know Jason. He is my dear friend. Hello, Jason. Weren't you just on this show recently?
Yeah, I guess he can't get enough.
And thank you for recommending me. Thank you for putting me in touch.
Have you and Jason somehow worked together at one point in the film business?
Well, we have, yes. Well, sort of. Well, no, I don't know. It's a good question. Jason and I are friends, and we have, we have similar and also nice branching out tastes. We can influence each other. We can do good recommendations for each other, but we also respect each other. And Jason's most recent short film, he was trying to put together. So I helped him get some of I helped him get some of the crew members.
We're talking about The Hit, right?
The Hit, which is a hit, by the way. It keeps getting into more festivals. It keeps winning more awards. The Hit
brilliant.
is a wonderful film. And so, yeah. And so I hope I was, I'd love to be able to help. I don't need credit for it. You know what I'm saying? Like, I'm just happy to have a fellow traveler in the film world do well. And so that's so good. And I hope I helped.
And let's not forget the brilliant performance by the actress Hilary Barraford. Just absolutely sensational. Very good job, Hilary.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah. So tell us a little bit. Okay, go back to punk rock a little bit.
Fair enough. Sure.
Okay, you like punk rock. There's a lot of people who don't understand the type. Yeah, there she is. Patty Smith. Is that her?
No, this is Polystyrene.
Polystyrene.
She was in a band called X-Ray Specs.
Okay.
And her music was about identity because she's a mixed race person in a very white world at the time, where all rock was a very white world, right? Very much. But also a new world of punk rock. And she also owned her style. I don't know that you can tell, but she has braces and she has super curly hair. And she has she's made her own costume. And so punk is about identity very often. It's about owning your identity. It's about not being judged by the world, right? And it's easier for a white guy to say, and I'm not 100% white, but it's easier for a white guy to say, you can't judge me. I look great, because you're the dominant look, right? You look like what everything is being sold or bought for. She looks like the opposite of what's everything. She's a darker skinned woman. She has braces. She has a round face. She is odd, right? To the dominant paradigm. But she's also saying, by her look and her personality, I don't care what you think of me, and I shouldn't, and you shouldn't either, right? I'm not saying I don't care about you. I'm saying I don't care if you think poorly about me. If you judge me, that's on you. I have my own beauty. And I know we feel a little differently now, 40 years later. 40 years later, there's a little bit more of that in the world. But then it was very hard. And if you looked or acted differently, and obviously outsiders are outsiders. If you look different, you still might be judged for it, right? You still might even be harmed for it. But back then, part of the music was about identity, was about saying we own our own culture, not white or black, but us. It's about our hearts. It's not about color or race. Or if it is about race, I'm going to put it in your face also. You should be thinking about it, one or the other. So
yeah, Paul, I wanted to ask you, punk rock, there's a lot of people who don't understand what punk rock is about, because it's making a statement. It's a very aggressive music, and it's very anti-government.
It can be. What I really feel that it's about, and again, ask 50 punk rockers what punk rock is about, you're going to get 100 different answers. So that's one thing about it. And there's two sort of P's in punk, right? There's the lowercase p, which would sort of just describe the music, and there's the uppercase p, which would describe sort of the religion, the politic of punk, right? The lowercase one, the music, is really about saying we can do this ourselves. It can be aggressive, which is great, but it also can be anti-aggressive. It could be odd. It could be quirky. It could be it's against the system of what's come before, right? It's about losing complacency in the system that's come before. It's also about saying, again, it's about taking your own identity. Rock back in the 70s was stadiums and the Eagles and the Doors and the Beatles, these giant rock acts. I know they'd already been gone in the 70s, but these giant rock acts that could play to 100,000 people. And how could you ever have a voice if you're fighting against these old white guys who make $100 million a year playing their garbage, tired music? You know what I'm saying? There seems to be no more heart in it. And punk tried to bring back the heart of music. And it also said, we don't need to be good musicians. We don't need to be good singers. We barely need to learn our instruments. If you love what we're saying and feeling, we can just make a little bit of noise. We can learn 3 chords, not 50 chords, and play those 3 chords and sing to it and sing our hearts out. Now, because we're singing sort of against the system, sometimes that can be aggressive, of course. right? But it's really saying, I'm singing my heart out. And I don't care if you like my voice or not. It's not about that. It's about, do you feel what I'm saying? And that's what it was about. And there are, I'm sure, 100,000 punk bands that no one will ever hear of, that no one recorded, that just played, for a year in a basement or in a tiny club or the back. Our club was in the basement of a used tire store that was dilapidated. So, and the ceilings were 7 feet tall. So there's this tiny fire trap that we used to go to, and there was 100 of us. And there were bands there that I hold up to the most amazing concerts I've ever seen, right? Their hearts were so pure. And by the way, you're touching each other, right? So you're just your heart, and you're touching them because they're not on a big stage. They're on a 2-inch riser, a 4-inch riser, right? So and you half the time you're on the stage with them anyway. So it's about this inclusivity. It's about this ad hoc family. And you might say, oh yes, I went to an Elton John concert and I felt like I was with a family. Yes, because you all loved Elton John. And by the way, my first big concert was Elton John. My first big concert was Elton John. My first little concert was a band called Jane County. And she was a transgender punk rocker. So that's the difference. I saw Elton John and I saw Jane County, who just transitioned. And that was at CBGB's. But the Jane County show was more impressive. And of course I was a kid. I knew every Elton John song that had existed. And I even whistled along with the same whistling. I loved Elton John when I was a little boy. But the Jane County the Jane County show, and I didn't know any of her songs, was more aggressive and more fun and more like we were all a part of it. And that was different for me. Of course I loved Elton John. But the little show was cooler. And and also, by the way, Elton John had not come out as gay yet, right, in the 70s. So there was, and to mirror that, Jane County had not only come out, she had transitioned, right? So that's so much more of an expression of self. And obviously she wasn't accepted by the world, but she was definitely accepted by New York City, in the Lower East Side, in the underground, in CBGB's, and that was the place to be for people who needed to be accepted. So that's the music. And I dare say, even now, if you're sitting at home and you think you need to be Billie Eilish, you don't need to, and she's great, but you don't need to be here. You can scream and yell into your computer with GarageBand, and I don't care what sounds you make, as long as you're pure. You might affect somebody much more than a giant rock star. And that always is worth doing. Don't let access, or don't let the phony, like, what's the word I'm looking for? Facade of like good sounding music or good video or good anything stop you from making art.
And also, a form, because with punk rock, there's a form of dancing that comes with it, and it's called slam dancing. And there's
Correct.
also other activity that goes on. There's also crowd surfing. So maybe you could explain what each one of those activities
I would be happy to.
are.
Sure. Well, no one knew really how to dance to this new music, right? But it moves you, right? It moves you. So you want to do something. So originally, people started just jumping up and down, right? They were just jumping up and down to the music excitedly. They're just getting it out of their system. And then someone called that pogoing, like a pogo stick, right? So you jump up and down. But the more people who would come into this tiny club, remember this basement that I'm in, that's, probably 15 feet wide by 40 feet long with 100 kids in it. Wow. One exit up a staircase. Luckily, we didn't smoke or anything, because fire trap city, right? Wow. But if you're all standing next to each other and you're just kids, right? You're just, because punk rock very, very early on allowed kids in, because they weren't allowed into, kids wanted to make music, and you didn't have to have 10 years of musicianship to be able to be a punk rocker. And we weren't allowed into regular clubs. And so no one cared about alcohol. So most of the clubs didn't have alcohol. So most of the clubs would allow a 13-year-old to come in. The clubs that were punk clubs. And they'd even draw an X on your hand, which is how this there's a straight edge movement thing where people draw X's on their hands to say, I don't drink. But it was to say, don't serve this person, they're underage. And so imagine 100 kids together listening to this music. They're almost touching each other and they're jumping up and down. That sort of became an aggressive sort of you'd bump into each other, and that got more and more refined to literally wanting to bump into each other, but you're accepting that the other person is bumping into you, right? You're accepting this aggressive punch, not punch like this, but punch with the body. And it became a form of expression. What was really cool about it was that it also scared away other people. Like, people would come down and they would be frightened. They would think that there was a fight going on and they would run away. But boys and girls and intersex alike, we looked out for each other. No one was harming each other. As a matter of fact, if somebody fell down, immediately a hole would open up in the crowd and people would pick that other person up and kind of dust them off and see if they were okay. And then sort of pat them on their back, and we'd all go back to it. And okay, so you have that going, and this is a really great outlet for teen angst, right? This is but no one's getting a concussion, or at least most people are not getting. It's happened, but no one's trying to get a concussion. You're just bumping into each other really hard, but it's also very sensual, right? It's so interestingly sensual. And remember this club. Let's picture the same club. You can't see in the back, right? Because the band's only 4 inches higher than everybody else, and they're kids, so they're not like on a stage that's 6 feet high that you can see from 100 feet away. So sometimes it was easier to sort of try to get up and see the band. They would try to get on someone's shoulders, and that sort of became, because you're packed in together, you would kind of get up, and then you realize that people would hold you up and you could kind of crawl on top of them all the way to the front. But then it became a funny thing where people would actually help another person across. And at the same time, you would notice that someone towards the person's head, whoever was on top, whoever was below, would kind of watch out for their head, because if that person fell through the cracks, which sometimes happened, there would always be someone to grab their shoulders or to protect their head from hitting the ground hard.
That's awesome.
So it was always about looking out for each other, even in the middle of this extremely aggressive, extremely loud, crazy thing, which makes it even more dynamically, to me, beautiful, right? Because even in the middle of the mayhem, we're still looking out for each other. We're still making sure no one's hurt. And go ahead.
Who were your musical influences? I bet the Ramones are in there. Probably
Sure.
Green Day.
No, Green Day's past me. To me, Green Day is I'm too old for them. Like I think, oh, those kids, they're not like the music I like. Well, I told you, X-Ray Specs,
Okay.
but also the Sex Pistols, and for American bands, it's the Ramones, and it's the Talking Heads, and Television, and the Avengers. There's a bunch from the early days, and then there's a lot of little tiny punk rock bands, the little tiny hardcore bands that influenced me. And there were bands that you've never heard of and never will hear of, but they're bands like the Vatican Commandos and No Milk on Tuesday and Violent Children. But my favorite American band that I would call avant-garde punk, post-punk, but also they're extremely good musicians, is a band called Mission of Burma.
Oh.
And I knew about them because my uncle, my punk rock uncle, my mentor uncle, was friends with one of them because he was from my home. One of them was from my hometown. His name was Clint Conley. And their music to me is, I see no better American rock band ever in my, even now when I say like, oh, I've loved all these bands, including people like, the Talking Heads and Patti Smith, I think Mission of Burma is the best American band that ever existed. And they're noisy and they're great. And I recommend them to you guys. So did I answer your question, or did I go off on a tangent?
Like beautiful. Yeah. I wanted to go back into filming a little bit. You're presently teaching at the New York Film Academy.
I am.
Okay, so you're teaching writing and directing. Is that correct?
I'm teaching directing right now.
Directing, okay.
But I am influencing them. It depends on which class I'm teaching, but I'm influencing them to try to tell their best story. So directing is still telling a story, right? So I may be co-teaching at the same time that their writing teacher is teaching them to write their thesis film. But I also might be after that, so I'm helping them with their edit and trying to help them get to their story again, right? It's all about telling the story. So even directing is not just directing actors. It's directing the audience to understand your story. So, yeah, I would say I teach directing, but it's a deeper meaning than just telling them how to get on. here's the thing. I'll give everyone who's listening a class. It'll take 30 seconds. I will teach you how to direct an American television show, like a Law and Order show, not a different show, not like a Sopranos, not like a bigger, deeper show, but a typical American television show. First of all, be nice to the actors, because they're going to hire you and fire you, because that's not your show. You're not the director. You're going there for maybe a week out of a year where they live there. So be nice to those actors. Learn what they want and learn how to listen to them. Be a good friend or a good babysitter, whatever they need. Then shoot a master shot. Shoot a medium close-up of each actor. Shoot an over-the-shoulder medium close-up. Shoot a close-up. Maybe a walk and talk shot, and you're done. That's it. That's all you have to do, because that's all you're doing, is you're just covering the scene. So close-up, over, medium, wide, done. That's it. That's all you need. That is every TV show. Now, in my opinion, is that making art? No, you're making television. Normal television. It's very simple. I mean, it's easier said than done, of course, but it's very simple in that typical TV until now we're at peak TV, beautiful TV, was not considered art, was not considered filmmaking. The story was more important than the images, right? The story was important. Sometimes for a show like, and I'm not trying to make fun of Law and Order, I'm just trying to give a big show, but it's about that kind of show is about letting your brain go, right? Taking a vacation. You're worked hard, you're home, you're having pizza, you're relaxing after a day's work, and you want to let your mind go. So you watch Friends, you watch Law and Order. But now we also have shows like, we have everything. You have everything from Fargo to, I like weird things like Normal People or there's 500 television shows released this year, and 200 of them are very good, which is amazing, right? I mean, all of them are hard to make. All of them are good, if I want to be respectful to the people who make them. But even in my opinion of, my highfalutin artist opinion, television is rocking right now, and it's opened itself up for artists. And I say artists by meaning they're not just trying to make vacation TV. Artists to say something, right? To say something where the audience is a participant in it, not just a casual observer.
You were telling me something very interesting, and the audience is going to be blown away when you explain this to them. So anyone who goes up to a television network or a streaming source, you're asking them to invest in your project. And you told me that if we get into, let's say, a 10-year investment, that source, that network, whatever, is like investing $250 million.
No, I'd say that even in a 5-year.
5-year? Oh my God.
Yeah. So I think you're asking, of course, this depends on the show, right? So if you're at Seinfeld's final season, all the 4 main characters are getting $1 million an episode.
Oh,
right. It's costing you about, $3 to $5 million maybe to make each episode. So you're already at, let's just say 10 million an episode, 22 episodes for that year, $220 million, right? So, that's just a quick shorthand. If you're making a smaller show, like a Netflix show that you've seen, a smaller show, you still might be you could be in the 1 million to 2 or 3 million to more than that. I mean, an HBO show could cost 10 million, 20 million an episode. So then times that by the number of episodes, plus their advertising they have to do. So when let's say you're going to pitch a show and it's just a show, it doesn't matter. You're going to pitch your show, right? You're going to pitch your show to Netflix. They're thinking, okay, there's 3 main actors, maybe 5 main actors. They're going to get paid a certain amount. We have to shoot in this location, that location. So if they're probably thinking if the show's going to go 3 or 5 years, they're at least in 200 million. If it's a show that has quality to it. And that's a lot of investment. And that freaks me out when thinking about it. Because I've pitched movies and I'll say, I want to make this movie and it's a horror movie and we've got monsters and all this stuff. We've got a couple of actors, but the house burns down in the end. And I think, and they're asking me how much that could cost. And I'm like, $800,000, $1 million. It's a little movie. Oh. And that's not much money to them. It's everything to me, but it's not much money to them. And then you go to a television show and they're going to spend that, maybe on 1 actor per episode.
Wow.
So depending on the actor, of course, depending on what season they're in, because each season the actor's price is going to go up too. So as seasons go along, they're paying more money just to make each episode, because they should, right? Because the actors are bringing in more viewers, because the show is successful. So season 3 and season 4, the actor's price goes up a lot, and it should. But that's when the studio's like, is it worth it now to pay double the amount to keep the show going? And that's why you see networks cancel shows after 2 or 3 seasons, because they can't afford it.
Okay, and you're also saying when you're doing a film, sound is absolutely important, because you said it's 51% of the film itself. You can fix a bad film with sound, but a good film with bad sound, if I understood right, is unfixable.
You quote me perfectly. Yeah, and I teach that too. And it's weird because you don't think that. You think that a good story told visually well will win the audience. No one cares anymore, right? We could be talking about like diffusing a bomb, right? The most interesting story ever. You have a bomb under your chair and you have to cut the red wire. Right? No one cares anymore, right? So and I'm not just saying bad sound at one thing, but I'm saying like cruddy sounding sound, right? Bad sound that sounds too far away, sound that isn't mixed properly. That will kill a film. And it's weird. And I tell, the most important thing about a film is the story and then characters, right? The characters have to be good enough to fit in this story. It has to be about something. Then the next thing, hire a sound person. Before you hire your camera person, hire your sound person. If you're going to pay one person, on 2 people on the set, pay your sound person and pay your caterer, because get everybody fed. People are happy if they're fed. But even a bad camera person cannot really destroy a movie. The sound person can. Not the sound person, but the lack of a sound person can. You can always fix a movie if sound is good.
So what did there's a lot of filmmakers watching tonight, and I'm one of them. And I'll take your advice. What do you think is the best microphone to have on set? Do you like using lavaliers?
I like both, because I like, and again, not everyone can afford it, but I like both, because then you get the opportunity, you get the option of being able, if something goes bad, you can fix it. If something goes bad, you can fix it. And I rarely have the money to be able to re-record dialogue, right? To do post-production sound, looping, it's called. And every single film, every single television show does re-record sound. So if you shoot a scene and there's a bad line or there's a cruddy sound, the actor's always been paid an extra little bit to come in later and do some additional dialogue recording. And it's so seamless, you don't even know that they're not in the same space they were. That's every movie, every TV show has the ability to do that for the most part. But really independent films don't, right? You don't have the money to call anybody back 6 months later and have them pay them a couple $1,000 and then rent the studio and then pay the recording artist to record. So you've already spent all the money by that point if you're a filmmaker, if you're an independent filmmaker. So I would rather spend the extra money on having a boom operator, a sound mixer, and lavaliers put on all the major actors. So at least have a 4-track mixer, if not a 6-track mixer. And I know that seems like a lot of money, but good sound, right? Good sound does everything for you. So why not know going into it, if you can, know going into it. Good sound, people tell me that a boom mic is a better sound than a lavalier mic, but I like both. I like to be able to capture it because I think I'm not going to be able to get the sound later. So I want to be able to make sure if the actor's turned away from the microphone that I can still hear them. But it all comes down to what money do you have, but it also comes down to smarts and planning, right? So if you have 6 months before you're going to make your film, find a cheap sound person. Start getting your mics together now. Don't wait till the last minute. Get a friend who can be good at it.
And the best microphone you could have on a boom is a shotgun microphone, right?
Probably, but again, it's going to depend on the scene and who's in the scene and where they are in the scene. And I'm not an expert at that. I'm okay at it, but I am not an expert at it. It usually is some type of shotgun mic, or at least a very directional mic, so that you point. I'm going to do this, right? So that you point this thing at the chest of the actor who's speaking.
Okay.
But And a very good boom person will know how to do that and follow them, and have already, it's not a surprise to them. They've seen the scene rehearsed, right? You rehearse it for them, so everyone knows where everyone's going, cameraman and sound woman alike, right? So yeah, but sound is 51% of the movie. You can quote me on that. So make sure you get good sound when going into it.
Got it. Okay, another question for you. Actually, it's a statement. You did something absolutely right, because you sold the movie of this homeless punk rocker, and you're getting some recognition for it.
I sold the story. Yeah, it is absolutely based on my life, but it is not my life story, right? It's one of those things where I went in and pitched to a major network, a major studio, my life story as a homeless punk rocker, a mixed race, homeless, genderqueer punk rocker who grew up in the early 80s in the rich white town in Connecticut. And his mother suffers from alcoholism and he becomes homeless. And so, and they bought it. So fingers crossed, we are allowed to make it after COVID. So,
wow.
Yeah. So that's, and when I say selling something, it's obviously different layers of selling something, right? Selling something means, yes, we're going to make it. Making it means you're getting paid for it. So selling it is just a piece of paper right now. Making it is when you get paid for it. But right now people are interested in a thing. They've told me they're interested, and they told me we're going to be shopping it to streamers and networks.
Excellent. Well, congratulations, and I wish you the best of luck on that.
Thank you.
Okay, Paul.
Yes, sir.
Okay, you have a soft spot for Canadian television.
I have a soft spot for Canadian television. I have a soft spot for Canadian filmmakers, and I have a soft spot for Canada. I would love to move there one day. There are a couple of places I love in Canada, all of it, but there's a couple of places I really love. But yes, one of the first Canadian things that I knew that I loved was this show, which most of your audience might know, which was Degrassi Junior High. And it was a show in the early 80s, mid 80s. And it was a show about kids. Now, yes, you might think of it as a kid's show, a teen, young adult drama, but it had a truth to it. It also had character truths to it. Like the characters were accepting. And this is way before the States figured out how to make a show like that. The States shows were still all little white kids, for the most part, all little white kids who looked exactly alike and who acted exactly alike. And Degrassi Junior High was pushing an edge. They were a little bit more socially real, and the characters were more socially real. Yes, and there were also a couple of punk rock characters on there, so that already made my heart open to them. And so, I will always have a crush on the two punk rock girls on that show. And the show was smart. It seemed, right? It seemed like it was this. It wasn't talking down to me. It was giving me a story, not necessarily of my life, but of lives I knew. And I already told you about Arthur Lipset, the Canadian director.
Yeah.
And Cronenberg and Adam McGoyan and Guy Madden and Mary Harron and Arthur Hiller. And a shout out to a director who may live near you now is Clement Vigo. He's a great, great director. He made a film called Rude and a film called Lie to Me. And he's done some episodes of The Wire. He's a great director, and I just want to give him a shout out. We met 15 years ago, and I thought he was a sweetheart and extremely, extremely smart. And he's a Black Canadian filmmaker. And if anyone's listening, give him money to make more films, Canada. Come on, Canada. It's you guys, you compete for money. Give him some, because he's a good filmmaker, a great filmmaker.
I believe he's in Toronto.
He may be in Toronto. That's where I met. Yes. That's where we had lunch there, and it was great. But if that's not that far from you, you can drive to Toronto pretty quickly.
6 hours.
Yeah, it's not so bad.
Sure. Yeah.
It's like here to San Francisco. Same drive.
Okay. So, Paul, tell me, what are your favorite TV shows or films that, something you could relate to?
So, because I'm a well-versed watcher of things, it's hard. I'm going to say my favorite My favorite film is a film by Robert Bresson, who's a French filmmaker, and the film is called The Devil Probably. That's the name of it. The Devil Probably. That is,
Okay.
yeah, it has the name Probably in it, right? So it's The Devil Probably. And it's about a young boy who's a math genius, who's kind of at the end of he's 20-ish, and he's at the end of his rope. He's thinking about ending his life. And it's about the characters in his life who talk to him about what's going on next. And so it's this, but there's almost no story, which I love story, but it's almost no story. It's sort of just about this angsty existential moment in his life, and about this sort of angelic characters that he interacts with. And it's also about humanity in 1977. So it has this beautiful quality to it. So that's my favorite movie. And I wish it could be more relatable, but it, if you want to talk about a different relatable film, my other favorite film is called The Ice Storm, and it's by Ang Lee, who's an Oscar-winning director. He did Brokeback Mountain, but he also did Lust, Caution. He did Life of Pi. He's a big director, but he made this little film called The Ice Storm, and coincidentally, it takes place in my hometown. So if you want to know exactly what my hometown looks like in 1975 or 1973, watch The Ice Storm. It's a beautiful film. It's a sweet film, and it's not me growing up, but it's all my neighbors. And he's a Taiwanese, he's a Chinese director, and he somehow came to my hometown and understood it perfectly, which is the sign of a good artist, right? They have an open heart and an open ear to be able to hear the nuances of how characters talk and feel, right? This in a different place, a place he's not familiar with, that he became very familiar with. So if you're a film director, have an open heart. Listen very carefully to what your characters are saying. Listen to where they're saying it. Specificity is more important than general. If you make it very specific, strangely enough, more people will relate to it.
Okay. Paul, this hour has gone by. It flew by like a 747 in the stratosphere. Wow. Where did this hour go? We had about 3 more pages to go, and it's like, wow. Like you said before we went on live, we can go on like for 8 hours, and it still wouldn't have enough time. So, Paul,
I thank you. That's for your open heart and your open ear, Robert. I appreciate that.
It was our profound pleasure to have you on. And listen, with that minute that we have left before we sign off, what would be your advice to all these people out there who are aspiring actors, aspiring writers, producers, directors? What's the advice you can give them?
Tell your story as true as you can tell it, whatever it is, and don't give up. Keep working on your craft all the time. Don't be depressed if you have to move home, but don't give up. Don't give up. Don't give up. The longer you stay at it, there will be attrition from everyone else. You'll still be standing in the end. Don't give up. If you don't have to give up, don't give up.
Okay. Well, Paul, thank you so much for having been with us.
Thank you, Robert.
Okay, and please stay behind. We're going to come and get you. We're going to continue our little conversation when we go off the air. Perfect. So to all of you who tuned in tonight and participated, thank you so much as well. Our guest tonight is a film director, a writer, a musician, and film teacher at the New York Film Academy, Paul Sanchez. Paul, thank you very much.
Thank you.
We'll come and get you in a few moments.
Wonderful. Ciao.
Well, there you have it, folks. That was our guest tonight from Hollywood, California, filmmaker Paul Sanchez, for short. A very great show that we had tonight. And thank you so much to everybody once again for tuning in. Next week, we're going to have a photographer from TVA Television Network here in Montreal. His name is Georges Dutil. That's going to be another interesting show. And we invite you to come on to Rob's Inner Circle at the same time for the same reason. And all you beautiful people, we invite you again, just come on by and come and have fun and ask all the questions that you have to ask our guests. So guys, it's time once again to sign off. And until next week, everybody, God bless you and have a great week. Thanks for tuning in. Ciao.